The night sky above London transforms into a kaleidoscope of terror as the sirens begin their mournful wail across the darkening city. It is September in the year 1940, and the sun has barely set before the first low drone of heavy engines vibrates through the cobblestone streets. Thousands of eyes look upward in collective dread as the clouds part to reveal the ominous silhouettes of Heinkel bombers drifting like sharks in deep water. Searchlights slice through the gloom to catch the steel bellies of the invaders, while the ground shakes with the rhythmic thumping of anti-aircraft fire. This is not a battlefield of soldiers in trenches, but a sprawling metropolis of families preparing for another night of calculated destruction. Explosions erupt along the docklands of the East End, sending plumes of thick black smoke billowing into the atmosphere to choke the moonlight. The intense heat from the incendiary bombs creates a firestorm that sucks the oxygen right out of the air, turning narrow alleyways into furnaces. Ordinary shopkeepers and factory workers scramble over piles of shattered glass and brick, trying to salvage what little remains of their livelihoods before the flames consume everything. The roar of the inferno is deafening, and it drowns out the screams of those trapped beneath the rubble of what were once safe Victorian terraced homes. This is the new face of modern warfare, where the front line is the family living room. A heavy silence falls briefly between the waves of bombardment, allowing the crackle of burning timber to echo through the hollowed-out shells of buildings. Mothers clutch their children tightly in damp corrugated steel Anderson shelters, buried in back gardens, praying that the thin metal will hold against the blast waves. The smell of cordite and pulverized masonry hangs heavy in the air, mixing with the acrid scent of burning rubber and gas leaking from ruptured mains. Every whistle of a falling bomb freezes the blood of those huddled in the dark as they count the seconds until impact, hoping the noise passes them by. The uncertainty of survival gnaws at the mind more than the hunger caused by rationing. The stakes could not be higher for the people of the United Kingdom as they stand alone against the might of a continent conquered by tyranny. This is not merely a battle for territory, but a struggle for the very existence of their culture and their future as a free people. If the morale of the civilian population breaks under the relentless hammering of the Luftwaffe, then the war is lost before the armies can even engage. The strategy of the enemy is clear and brutal, which is to terrorize the innocent until they demand capitulation from their leaders. Every home destroyed is a tactical victory for the aggressor, and every sleepless night is a weapon used to erode the will to resist. History is watching this island nation to see if a democracy can withstand the total fury of an authoritarian war machine without crumbling into chaos. The destruction of landmarks and libraries signifies an attempt to erase the identity of a people and sever their connection to the past. It is a war of attrition fought not with tanks and artillery alone, but with the nerves and stamina of the elderly, the young, and the infirm. The collapse of London would signal the end of hope for occupied Europe and plunge the world into a darkness that might last for centuries. The weight of this reality rests on the shoulders of ordinary citizens who must wake up every morning and carry on amidst the ruins. Amidst the chaos walks Arthur Pennyworth, a man who has traded his quiet life as a greengrocer for the heavy wool coat and steel helmet of an air raid precautions warden. Arthur patrols the shattered streets of his childhood neighborhood with a stoic determination that masks the fear fluttering in his chest. He knows every family on this block, and he knows exactly who is sleeping in which basement and who has refused to leave their top-floor apartment. His flashlight cuts a narrow beam through the dust-filled air as he scans the rooftops for the telltale glow of incendiary devices that must be extinguished before they can spread. He is the first line of defense for his community. Arthur pauses near the entrance of a public shelter as the ground trembles violently from a nearby impact that sends a shower of roof tiles clattering onto the pavement. He grips his wooden gas rattle tightly, ready to sound the alarm if the yellow mist of mustard gas is detected amidst the smoke. His boots crunch over the debris of a bakery where he bought bread just yesterday morning, and a pang of sorrow tightens his throat. There is no time for mourning now, as duty calls him to check the blackout curtains of the widow living at number 42. A single sliver of light escaping from a window could be the beacon that guides a bomber directly to their heads. The sensory experience of the warden is a nightmare of contrasting extremes, from the blinding flash of high explosives to the pitch-black darkness of the blackout. The noise is a physical force that batters the eardrums, leaving a constant ringing that never quite goes away even in the quiet hours of dawn. Arthur tastes the grit of pulverized brick dust on his tongue and feels the heat of the fires radiating against his face even from a block away. His hands are raw and blistered from digging through rubble with bare fingers to reach voices crying out from the dark voids beneath collapsed walls. Fatigue is a constant companion that drags at his limbs like laid weights. Inside the cavernous tube stations deep beneath the city, thousands of Londoners try to find rest on the cold concrete platforms while the trains rumble past just feet away. The air is thick and stale, recycled through the lungs of strangers who have been thrown together by the shared necessity of survival. Children sleep curled up in woolen blankets, oblivious to the history unfolding above their heads, while their parents stare blankly at the curved tiled walls. There is a strange camaraderie here, where class distinctions dissolve in the face of indiscriminate death. A wealthy banker shares a thermos of tea with a dockworker, and for a moment they are simply two men hoping to see the sunrise. This scene of civilian siege is tragic, but it is not unique in the long and bloody tapestry of human conflict. Decades earlier and thousands of miles away across the Atlantic Ocean, the citizens of Vicksburg, Mississippi, faced their own ordeal of iron and fire. The Union Army under Ulysses Simpson Grant had encircled the hill city, trapping soldiers and civilians alike in a stranglehold of starvation and bombardment. Just as the Londoners retreated underground, so too did the Southern families dig caves into the clay hillsides to escape the mortar shells raining down from the river. The tools of war change, but the terror of the innocent remains a constant universal truth. In Vicksburg, the elegant parlors of the antebellum homes were abandoned for damp earthen dugouts reinforced with timber and furnished with salvaged carpets. The women of the city, who were once accustomed to fine silks and leisurely afternoons, found themselves cooking mule meat and pea bread over small fires in the mud. The constant shelling from the gunboats on the Mississippi River created a rhythm of fear that dictated every movement of their daily lives. They watched their children grow thin and pale as the food supplies dwindled to nothing, yet they maintained a fierce pride that refused to bow to the besiegers. Their resilience mirrored that of the Londoners who would come after them. Back in London, Arthur Pennyworth continues his patrol as the raid intensifies near the industrial sector, threatening the gasworks. He spots a small fire flickering on the roof of a warehouse and knows he must act quickly before it becomes a beacon for the next wave of bombers. He scrambles up the metal fire escape with a stirrup pump in hand, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The wind whips his heavy coat around his legs, and the roar of the planes overhead is so loud it vibrates in his teeth. He is just one man with a bucket of water against the might of the German Air Force, but he refuses to yield. The question that hangs over the city is not just one of military strategy, but of human endurance in the face of overwhelming horror. How much punishment can a population absorb before the social fabric begins to tear apart at the seams? The planners of the Blitz believed that the terror would cause the people to rise up against their government and demand peace at any price. They calculated the tonnage of explosives required to break the spirit of the average citizen, but they failed to account for the stubborn resolve of the human heart. Instead of panic, the bombs bred a cold anger and a grim determination to see the war through to the bitter end. Survival becomes a logistical miracle as water mains are shattered and gas lines are severed, leaving neighborhoods without heat or hydration. The women of the Auxiliary Territorial Service drive ambulances through the cratered streets, dodging debris and shrapnel to transport the wounded to hospitals that are themselves under fire. Firefighters stand atop trembling ladders, directing hoses into the heart of infernos, while walls collapse around them in showers of sparks. The entire city mobilizes into a single organism, dedicated to keeping the heart of the capital beating despite the wounds inflicted upon it. Every act of normalcy becomes an act of defiance. As dawn approaches, the drone of the aircraft finally fades into the distance, leaving behind a silence that is almost more frightening than the noise. The all-clear siren sounds a long, steady note that signals the end of the immediate danger, but the work is only just beginning. Arthur Pennyworth descends from the roof, his face smeared with soot, and his hands trembling from the adrenaline crash. He walks through the streets that are now unrecognizable landscapes of jagged brick and twisted metal. He checks his roster of residents and marks off the names of the survivors, while his heart aches for those who will never answer again. The morning light reveals the true extent of the devastation as the sun struggles to penetrate the haze of smoke that hangs over the skyline. Entire blocks have been reduced to mounds of rubble where personal treasures like photographs and teacups lie broken in the dust. People emerge from the shelters blinking in the harsh light and begin the heartbreaking task of searching for their homes. There are tears of grief for the lost and tears of relief for the living, but there is surprisingly little hysteria. The British stiff upper lip is not a myth, but a survival mechanism forged in the fires of the Blitz. The narrative of civilian suffering extends beyond the borders of Britain and the United States to the very heart of the enemy nations as the war turns. The strategy of area bombing adopted by the Allies brings the horror of firestorms to cities like Hamburg and Dresden in a brutal retaliation. The civilians there face the same terror of the siren, and the shelter the same loss of home and kin. War creates a brotherhood of victims that transcends nationality and politics, binding the innocent together in a shared tragedy. The mother in Dresden weeping for her child sheds the same tears as the mother in London or Vicksburg. In the Pacific Theater, the suffering takes on a different shape as the island-hopping campaigns bring the conflict to the doorsteps of remote villages. Civilians in Okinawa find themselves caught between the unyielding defense of the Imperial Army and the overwhelming firepower of the American forces. They hide in limestone caves that become tombs as the battle rages over their heads with flamethrowers and grenades. The distinction between combatant and non-combatant blurs in the chaos of total war, leaving thousands to perish in the crossfire. Their stories are often lost in the broad strokes of military history books. Arthur Pennyworth arrives back at his own small flat to find the windows blown out and the front door hanging off its hinges. He steps inside over the broken glass and picks up a framed photograph of his late wife that has fallen from the mantelpiece. He wipes the dust from the glass and places it carefully back in its spot, a small gesture of restoring order to a chaotic world. He makes a cup of tea on a camping stove and sits in his armchair staring at the cracks in the ceiling. He is exhausted beyond measure, but he knows he will put on his helmet again tonight. The psychological toll of the bombardment is a wound that bleeds internally long after the physical scars of the city have healed. Children who grow up in the shelters develop a fear of the open sky and a flinch response to loud noises that lasts a lifetime. The constant proximity to death strips away the innocence of youth and forces them to grow up with a hardness that their parents never intended. They play games of war in the bomb sites using pieces of shrapnel as toys, unaware of the irony. The trauma weaves itself into the DNA of the generation. Yet amidst the rubble there are stories of profound kindness and community that shine like diamonds in the coal dust. Strangers share their last crust of bread with those who have lost their ration books in the fires. Neighbors dig for hours with bleeding hands to rescue a trapped dog or to salvage a wedding dress from a crushed wardrobe. The barriers of privacy that usually define city life are broken down, creating a collective spirit that is both desperate and beautiful. It is this spirit that the bombs cannot destroy, no matter how many tons of high explosive fall from the clouds. The war eventually turns and the skies above London grow quieter as the Luftwaffe is driven back to defend its own crumbling borders. The sirens sound less frequently, and the nights of uninterrupted sleep become a luxury that is slowly reclaimed. But the landscape of the city is forever changed, with gaping holes in the streetscape that look like missing teeth in a smile. The landmarks that survived stand as defiant symbols of resilience, while the empty spaces serve as memorials to the fallen. The people begin to look forward to a future that seemed impossible just a few years ago. In Vicksburg, the siege ended with surrender on the 4th of July, a date that the city would refuse to celebrate for decades to come. The civilians emerged from their caves pale and emaciated to find their city occupied and their way of life gone with the wind. The trauma of the 47-day siege lingered in the collective memory of the town, passed down through generations as a cautionary tale of hardship. The physical scars on the land healed over with grass and trees, but the historical memory remained sharp and painful. It serves as a reminder that the end of combat is not the end of suffering. The reveal of the true cost of the war comes only after the treaties are signed and the armies have gone home. It is found in the census records that show the gaps in the population and in the hospitals filled with the maimed and the blinded. It is found in the empty chairs at the dinner tables and the nightmares that wake men and women in the dead of night. The civilian casualties are not just statistics to be tallied in a ledger but human universes that have been extinguished. The untold stories are the ones buried in the graveyards of the world. As Arthur hangs up his warden helmet for the final time, he looks out over a city that is battered but unbroken. He sees the green shoots of willowherb growing on the bomb, sights a symbol of nature reclaiming the ruin. He sees children playing in the street again, their laughter echoing where once there were only screams. He knows that the world has changed forever and that the shadows of the past will always walk beside him. But he also knows that he survived, and that in itself is a victory. The legacy of these conflicts teaches us that the line between the soldier and the civilian is an illusion in the age of total war. When nations mobilize their entire industrial capacity to destroy one another, the factory worker becomes as much a target as the infantryman. The moral boundaries that once protected the innocent are eroded by the logic of necessity and the thirst for victory. We must remember these stories not to glorify the resilience of the survivors, but to mourn the failure of humanity that made such resilience necessary. We look back at the black and white photographs of the Blitz and the sketches of Vicksburg, and we see the faces of people just like us. They were not heroes by choice, but by circumstance, forced to endure the unendurable. Their courage was not found in charging a machine gun nest, but in boiling water for tea while the roof burned. It was found in the quiet refusal to let fear dictate their lives. They are the silent witnesses to the madness of their times. The rebuilding of the cities takes decades as the rubble is cleared and new concrete structures rise from the ashes of the old. The scars of the war are slowly covered over by the progress of the mid-century, but they are never truly erased. Occasionally, a construction crew will uncover an unexploded bomb buried deep in the clay, a sleeping giant left over from the days of terror. It serves as a sudden, jarring reminder that the peace we enjoy is built on a foundation of precarious survival. Today we walk past the monuments to the generals and the admirals, and we read the names of the battles etched in stone. But there are few monuments to the mother who shielded her child or the warden who dug through the night. Their names are recorded only in the hearts of those they saved and in the fading memories of the elderly. It is our duty to speak their names and to tell their stories so that they are not lost to the silence of time. They are the civilian casualties, and they paid the highest price. The concept of collateral damage is a sanitized term used to distance us from the reality of torn flesh and shattered lives. It reduces the tragedy of a lost family to a footnote in a military report, making it easier to accept the unacceptable. By looking closely at the individual lives of people like Arthur Pennyworth and the families of Vicksburg, we strip away that distance. We force ourselves to confront the true face of war, which looks remarkably like our own reflection in a broken mirror. As the sun sets on the history of the 20th century, the long shadows of its wars stretch out to touch the present day. The lessons learned in the shelters of London and the caves of Vicksburg are relevant in every modern conflict where civilians are caught in the crossfire. The technology of killing has advanced with terrifying speed, but the vulnerability of the human body remains exactly the same. The cry of a child in a war zone sounds the same in any language and in any era. We must carry these untold stories with us as a shield against the glorification of combat and the forgetting of its costs. The whisper of time speaks to us through the diaries and the letters and the oral histories of those who endured. It tells us that peace is fragile and that it must be guarded with the same intensity that was once used to wage war. The civilian experience is the true history of warfare stripped of the medals and the parades. In the end, the story of the civilian in war is a testament to the indomitable will of the human spirit to seek light in the darkness. It is a story of love surviving amidst hate and of hope blooming in the wasteland of destruction. We honor them not by building statues, but by striving to create a world where such endurance is no longer required. We remember them by ensuring that their suffering was not in vain. The echoes of the sirens have faded, and the fires have long since burned out, but the ghosts of the past remain. They stand on the street corners of London and on the hills of Vicksburg, watching us to see what we will do with the peace they suffered for. They ask us the silent question that has no easy answer. Will we learn from their pain, or are we doomed to repeat the cycle of destruction? Let the untold stories of the civilian casualties be a solemn reminder of the fragility of our civilization. Let them be the conscience that guides the hands of those who hold the power to unleash the dogs of war. And let us never forget that behind every casualty statistic lies a beating heart, a universe of dreams, and a story waiting to be told. This is their legacy, and it is now in our hands.